Hey there, welcome back to Datartic. Today, we are diving into a practical data migration tutorial and we'll tackle it one step at a time. To quickly recap our architecture from the previous video, our data migration journey is divided into two phases. Phase 1, migrating from source to staging. Phase 2, migrating from staging to destination. Our main focus today is phase 1, and we'll break it down into two simple steps to make it easier to understand and solve. We'll start by solving the data migration challenge for just one table. Then we'll take it a step further by solving it for all tables. Stick around because by the end of this tutorial, you'll have a clear grasp of process, whether you're dealing with one table or many. Again, you'll also find these tutorials step by step on my blog website datartic.com, where you can refer back to this content. So let's roll up our sleeves and get started with phase 1, step by step. It's time to master data migration. All right, let's make sure our environment is ready before we begin our data migration journey. It's simpler than it sounds, I promise. First things first, if you don't have a SQL Server installed, head over to the official Microsoft website where you can download the free Express edition. To interact with the server, you'll also need SQL Server Management Studio, which you can again download it from the Microsoft website. Now, once you have got SQL Server Management Studio up and running, there's one more crucial step. We need to download a .bak file and restore it on SQL Server. You'll find tons of free back files online. For this tutorial purposes, we'll use one from the Microsoft official website. You can find the .bak file with the name AdventureWorks 2022 that we can use with this tutorial and then restore it with the name LabWork. You can find the steps to restore a BAK file on the official website as well. Again, you'll find tons of resources online for all these steps, and links will be posted in the description. If everything is set up right, you'll see something like this. So connecting to your database engine and SQL Server Management Studio will bring up the list of databases, and our restored database with LabWork shows up in this SSMS. Clicking on the tables icon will show us a list of tables that are ready to be migrated. With our database now restored and ready, let's continue setting up our Azure portal. Head to Google and just type Azure portal. If you haven't already signed up, the good news is when you sign up, you'll get a $200 free credit for the first 30 days, which should be more than enough for this tutorial. When you land into the home page, you can click on New to Azure Start Free link to get started. Once you're all set up, you should something like this in your dashboard. Since I've already have my account here, I'm just going to click on use an existing subscription in your account. Clicking this should land you up in the Azure portal dashboard where you'll see a list of services to get started. There are multiple ways to create an Azure storage account. You can either click this plus icon where it says create a resource, or you can utilize the search bar and type in Azure storage account. You'll see a list of services here and you can select the first one. Hit create to create your storage account. By default, you'll be attached with a subscription. And for this tutorial, I'll be using Azure subscription 1 that was assigned to my account. A resource group, when you're creating it for the first time, you wouldn't see anything over here. So you'll have to create a new resource group, hit the create new icon, give a new name. I already have one defined, so I'll be selecting that in this tutorial. For the storage account name, make sure you give a unique name and click on next. In the advanced settings, make sure you enable hierarchical namespace. Rest all the settings should be by default good for this tutorial, so you can directly hit review. It runs a final validation and gives you a create option, which should spin up your storage account. For this tutorial, I've already defined a storage account, which I'll be showing you, something called as Datartic storage account. So once you have your storage account provisioned, it should look something like this. Imagine an Azure storage account as your personal Google Drive account in the cloud. Just like Google Drive, it provides a secure, organized, and scalable space to store and manage your digital assets. In this analogy, your Azure storage account is like having your own Google Drive account. It's your dedicated cloud storage space provided by Microsoft Azure. Now let's talk about blob containers within your Azure storage account. Think of them as an individual Google Drives within your account. So each blob container is like a separate Google Drive folder where you can store specific types of data or group related files together. Just as you create folders inside Google Drive for different projects or purposes, you can create blob containers for specific data storage needs. So you can create your container by hitting the plus icon for the container, give it a unique name, and just hit create. Since I already have one over here, it looks something like this, where I have defined a folder called as migration data, where we'll be storing our migrated data over here in the form of CSVs, which is going to look something like this. Once you have your storage account and blob containers ready, we'll be setting up our second service, that is Azure Data Factory. So search for Data Factory, hit create, and fill in the basic details as we did for the storage account, and hit preview plus create. Once you have that created, it's going to look something like this, where you can launch your Azure Data Factory Studio. It takes a while, but after having everything ready, we can create our pipelines, define our data sets, integration runtimes, and all other fun stuff. So to get started, hit the pencil icon to author your pipelines. So right now, as you see, we don't have any pipelines, data sets, data flows, or any other thing defined. So first we are going to create pipelines. Hit the pipeline action icon and click on new pipeline. Give it a name. For this, I'm going to give a dummy pipeline name. So these on the left in the toolbar, you can see multiple activities over here that you can use for your business purposes. We'll give a basic wait activity just to define our pipeline here, where you can give it a wait time in seconds. Hit publish to save your pipeline. And you can either debug this pipeline or trigger it depending upon the scenario. So hit the trigger now and hit OK. So to view the pipeline run, you can go to the Monitor tab, click on your dummy pipeline, and you can see it succeeded. Congratulations on setting up your first pipeline. So now that you have an understanding of how a pipeline is created and it's triggered, now let's create our first pipeline to get our table copied over from SQL Server onto ADLS2. Remember that we are in the phase 1 where we are migrating tables from SQL Server to ADLS2. And within that, in the phase 1, we are creating just this process for one table. So let's get started with that. First things first, let's give this pipeline a descriptive name. Hit the properties icon. Give it a descriptive name like SQL to ADLS2 only one table that shows what this pipeline is doing. And delete this wait activity. And the activity that we are going to use over here to achieve our use case is the copy activity, where you give a source and sink. So this allows you to kind of give it an idea on where to copy from and where to copy it to. So give it a name like copy data from SQL to ADLS2. And the source here is the source data set that you need to define on the SQL Server side. So since we don't have anything yet, we're going to hit new over here. We're going to search for SQL Server. And we're going to give a link service. So initially, when creating the link service for the first time, you wouldn't have anything defined here. So you would click on create new. And you can give your SQL Server name over here. So in this case, we do not have an auto resolve integration runtime because this SQL server that we have is running on our local. So we're going to click on new for defining an integration runtime. Now, if you don't know what an integration runtime is, it's nothing but a way of Azure Data Factory to know where the particular server is. So if you want to know more, you can look up about integration runtime in the Datartic blog, where it shows you step by step on how to set up your integration runtime. So right now we're gonna follow those steps, and once we have everything ready, uh, we're gonna come back with the more details over here. Assuming that you have followed the steps from Datartic blog, your link service should look something like this. If you haven't, check out the link in the description. So once you have the link service defined, you can connect it to your SQL Server by giving your SQL Server name, your database, and the type of authentication. In this case, you can use either SQL or Windows. Windows authentication for this tutorial makes it more easier to connect you with your username and password. So hit test connection to check if all the details are correct. Once this is successful, you can go back to setting up your dataset. So I'm going to give this a name as employee table, as I'm migrating only the employee table from SQL Server. And I'm going to select the link service that we just defined. Once you hit the drop down on table name, it usually takes a while to refresh the whole list of tables. All right, so once you see the list of tables, you can select any table. And again, as I'm migrating employee table, I'm going to select employee table and hit OK. Now, since we have defined our source, it's time to define our sink. So the sink, remember, it's the Azure Data Lake Gen 2 that we have to define on the sink side. So to get started with that, hit the sink icon, click new, search for Azure Data Lake Gen 2, click continue. And since we want this data to be text delimited, we're gonna click on CSV delimited text and hit continue. Give it a name like employee table dataset. Choose a link service. So in our case, we do not have any link service, so we are gonna click on new. Again, link service is a way for Azure Data Factory to kind of connect with the services. So I'm gonna give it a name Azure Data Lake Storage Datartic. And for the integration runtime, you can select integration runtime local. For the Azure subscription, you can select your Azure subscription that all the resources are tied up in. Select your storage account name that we defined earlier and hit on test connection. You can provide a description of this data lake. This helps you kind of locate this and understand what this data lake is all doing. So once this connection is successful, you can hit create. So now you'll have your source and sink defined. You just have to select where particular folder we need this to sync in. So hit browse, select the Datartic staging area, and then click on the folder that you have defined. If you haven't defined a folder over here, you can go back to your storage account, go to your containers, select the container that you define, and click on add a directory over here. You can give it a name. So once you have that defined, you can click on OK. Leave the file name as empty, as it will migrate the file and give the file name to same as the table name. So click on OK. Give it some time as it tries to make that magic happen behind the scenes. And then once you have the copy activity ready, you can see you have a clear source defined and a sink defined. If you've noticed one thing in the source, there's an option to preview the data. It gives you an idea of what the source data looks like. So hit the preview data icon and then you can see your source data. All right. So you can click on debug. Remember earlier I clicked on trigger. So the difference between debug and trigger is for triggers, you need to go to monitor tab to see the pipeline run. Whereas in debug, you can see it locally. There are a few other subtle differences, like in debug, you cannot run a lot of things in parallel in a for each loop and stuff like that. So for now, we're gonna use debug to kind of debug it in local. So the pipeline's running and it looks like it succeeded. So it shows how many rows were read, how many rows were written, 290. You can go back to your storage account, go to your blob container and go back to your folder. There you go. You can see your table migrated. Congratulations on your phase one completion. Once you're here, you can click on these three dots, click on view edit. There you go. You can see your data migrated as a CSV. See you in the next part where we will be discussing on how to migrate all the other tables dynamically without manually being it defined. Thank you for watching and see you guys in the next video.